Dearest new neighbor at 657 Boulevard, allow me to welcome you to the neighborhood. How did you end up here? Did 657 Boulevard call to you with its force within? Do you know the history of the house? Do you know what lies within the walls of 657 Boulevard? Why are you here? I will find out. You have children. I've seen them. So far, I think there are 3 that I have counted. Are there more on the way? Do you need to fill the house with the young blood I requested? Better for me. Was your old house too small for the growing family? Or was it greed to bring me your children? Once I know their names, I will call to them and draw them to me. There are hundreds and hundreds of cars that drive by 657 Boulevard each day. Maybe I am in one. Look at all the windows you can see from 657 Boulevard. Maybe I am in one. Welcome, my friends. Welcome. Let the party begin. Welcome, my friends. Welcome.
Back to episode 35 of Super Mystery Bros. As always, I'm Nate, and back with me live in the Super Mystery Studio is Ivan. Ivan, what's new with you, man?
Just surviving the summer, man, kind of, you know?
Yeah, it's hot
You know
out.
how summers are here.
Yeah, it's pretty hot.
Yeah.
What are we here to talk about tonight, man?
We are here to talk about the Watcher House, one of the most fascinating mysteries of our time.
What's that, man?
Buying your dream home should be among the happiest times of your life, but for the Broadduses, a family of 5, what should have been the happiest time of their lives turned into nothing short of a shared nightmare. In early June of 2014, as the family closed on their new home and began moving in, strange and menacing letters began to be mailed to them from someone claiming to be the Watcher of the home. The Broadduses were so unsettled by the creepy letters that they never ended up moving into the home, instead renting it out for several years, before finally selling it off at a significant loss. Which begs the question, could you be next? Too loud. Stay tuned to find out.
Holy shit, man. Real quick before we move on, I'd like to just shout out our main source for tonight's episode, which is a really long article on thecut.com written by Reeves Weideman. It did frustrate me quite a bit because he did write it all out of sequence like a Quentin Tarantino movie or something, which don't do it, guys. Also, don't trust anyone who has a last name for a first name. Our story begins one day in the jovial summer in the nostalgic year of 2014. The Broaddus family, consisting of patriarch Derek, 40, his wife Maria, and 3 children, a son and 2 daughters aged 5, 8, and 10, had just purchased their dream home, located at 657 Boulevard in Westfield, New Jersey, just a few days prior. It was an absolute beauty. Originally built in 1905, this 6-bedroom, 4-bath, 2-story home was located near to where Maria had spent her childhood. The family had finally made it. Derek was now earning a salary generous enough to afford his family this $1.3 million home in a quiet, idyllic New Jersey neighborhood, and Maria was a supermom raising their 3 wonderful children. To those of you who watched Nickelodeon as a kid in the 1990s, think The Adventures of Pete and Pete, which was shot on location just 5 to 10 minutes down the road from this address over in Cranston. So if you have trouble picturing the neighborhood, just think back to Pete and Pete. It's a cozy little upper middle class suburb in Anytown, USA, full of quirky, zany characters who are well intentioned, yet always finding themselves in wacky situations. But on this day in particular, the faint droning of distant lawnmowers was accompanied by the scent of freshly cut grass washing over the neighborhood. Neighborhood kids whose summer vacations had just begun were out in full force. Some rode their bikes around, doing sick jumps. Others were shooting hoops in their driveways. And still others bounced around on trampolines with the boundless energy of youth. Neighborhood dogs ran around, playfully yipping and biting at the streams of water shooting up from the sprinkler systems as the afternoon sun began to wane into early dusk. Lawns glistened a lush, dark green in the fading sunlight, some lightly dusted by freshly fallen leaves from the tall trees lining the sides of Boulevard. High above, the vast canvas of sky began to transition from a deep blue to a pale lavender twilight. Wispy cirrostratus clouds, like brushstrokes of the finest cotton, glowed a fiery orange with the last remnants of summer sun. It was as if 1993 never came to an end. But as the late afternoon sun dipped beneath the horizon, long, shadowy fingers were cast over the home at 657 Boulevard. An unsettling stillness hung heavy in the air, a stark contrast to the idyllic summer scene just moments prior. It was a peace that felt off. No one, not even the late Sylvia Brown, could have foreseen the wave of terror to come. And for the survivors and their families, life would never be the same again.
Yeah, man, such a poetic description, you know?
Yeah.
Is it kind of inspired by your childhood memories or?
Allegedly.
Allegedly. Awesome. Amongst the backdrop of a beautiful summer evening, the Broaddus children were arguing among each other as to which of the three fireplaces of the home would be designated for Santa Claus. And Derek and Marie had just wrapped up after a long day of painting the walls of their new home. They had been hard at work for past few days, renovating the house and touching it up prior to their planned move-in. Maria and kids soon left 657 Boulevard to head back to their previous home located in a different neighborhood of Westfield, where they were considered pillars of the community.
This is a true story.
What's the source of that information, man? Just kidding.
Do I really need a source for that? That's just common knowledge, man.
Pillars of the community.
Yeah.
Okay. Derek, after a hard day's work on his new house, trotted over to the mailbox to grab. Derek, after a hard day's work on his new house, trotted over to the mailbox to grab the mail. Wiping the sweat off his brow using his forearm, he flicked open the mailbox and grabbed a fat stack of mail, mostly Domino's pizza coupons and other junk. I like those coupons, by the way, man. It's kind of mean. Like second nature, he brought it in and set it on the counter without so much as a second thought. But as he rifled through it later that night, he noticed a square greeting card-sized envelope. On the front, it was addressed to the new owner, handwritten, but with no return address. Perplexed by this, he immediately tore open the envelope and unfolded the letter. Quote, "Dearest new neighbor at 657 Boulevard, allow me to welcome you to the neighborhood." End quote. It was a typewritten letter which welcomed him and his family to the neighborhood. However, as his eyes scanned further down the paper, he was shocked and horrified by what he saw.
Just as a quick disclaimer here before we begin, it kind of appears that none of the letters were made public in full, so all we have is certain sections of them that are quoted word for word, and then the rest of them are sort of paraphrased or missing entirely. So keep that in mind as we tell the story. Anyway, first letter begins as follows. Quote, "How did you end up here? Did 657 Boulevard call to you with its force within? 657 Boulevard has been the subject of my family for decades now, and as it approaches its 110th birthday, I've been put in charge of watching and waiting for its second coming. My grandfather watched the house in the 1920s, and my father watched it in the 1960s. It is now my time. Do you know the history of the house? Do you know what lies within the walls of 657 Boulevard? Why are you here? I will find out." End quote. The letter writer goes on to write, quote, "I see already that you have flooded 657 Boulevard with contractors so that you can destroy the house as it was supposed to be. Tisk, tisk, tisk. Bad move. You don't want to make 657 Boulevard unhappy. You have children. I have seen them. So far, I think there are 3 that I have counted. Are there more on the way? Do you need to fill the house with the young blood I requested? Better for me. Was your old house too small for the growing family? Or was it greed to bring me your children? Once I know their names, I will call to them and draw them to me. Who am I? There are hundreds and hundreds of cars that drive by 657 Boulevard each day. Maybe I am in one. Look at all the windows you can see from 657 Boulevard. Maybe I am in one. Welcome, my friends. Welcome. Let the party begin. Signed, The Watcher. Derek immediately closed all the blinds and windows, turned off the lights, and called the police. All right, man. So how would you feel if you received this letter? What would your reaction be?
Yeah, actually, like one of our favorite words, man. I would be shocked and horrified by the letter, you know?
What would you do in that moment, though? Like, how would you feel? What would your reaction be?
Like if I was Derek, right?
Yeah, if you were Derek.
The warden of the letter, you know, he seemed to know what would like make people paranoid and stuff. He would talk like about like vulnerable stuff, like children, right?
Yeah. Yeah, he's talking about like, I'm going to summon your children to, not in those exact words, but basically he's like, I'm going to call your children to me. And that would freak me out too.
Definitely.
Yeah.
The police officer who responded to Derek's call read the note and reportedly said, quote, "What the fuck is this, comrade?" No. And reportedly just said, quote, "What the fuck is this?" Unfortunately for Derek, the police did nothing but ask him if he had any enemies and to move some heavy objects from the backyard in case the Watcher decided to come by and throw them through the window. Derek rushed back to his old home to reunite with his family and informed his wife, Maria, of the situation, deciding the best course of action would be to write an email to the previous owners of 657 Boulevard, John and Andrea Woods, who were both retired scientists that lived in the home for 23 years, to ask if they knew anything about so-called Watcher. The next morning, they received a reply from Andrea, who said that the couple did in fact receive a letter from someone calling themselves the Watcher shortly before moving out of the home, but found it to be more odd than threatening. Unfortunately, they had thrown it away by this point. But aside from this one-off instance, they had never heard anything from this person before. The police, upon hearing the Broaddus and Woods stories, instructed them to not tell anyone about the letters, especially their neighbors, who were now all considered suspects.
At some point in the following week, Derek was out chatting it up with one of the neighbors when they filled him in on the Langford family, who lived right next door to the Broadduses' new home. According to the neighbor, the family was odd. The mother was in her 90s, and all of her adult children, in their 60s, were still living with her. Derek initially believed that this home likely contained the culprit they had been looking for. Michael Langford, one of Peggy's adult children, was of particular interest. He was described as a Boo Radley character, and the family had been living there since the 1960s, which was when the Watcher claimed to have begun watching the house. The family patriarch Richard had passed away 12 years prior, which roughly lined up with the Watcher's claim that he, or she, had been watching the house for the better part of 2 decades. However, unbeknownst to Derek, Detective Leonard Lugo was one step ahead and had already brought Michael Langford into the police station for questioning days prior, but he denied knowing anything about the letters. According to Lugo, short of an admission, there wasn't much the police could do. However, much of what Michael said matches up with the things that were mentioned in the letter, which I couldn't find any specifics on what those could be, so it might just be a police secret. Ivan, why don't you continue on here?
The Watcher letter ended up uprooting the family's entire lives by causing them to cancel much of their plans. The 2 parents kept a much closer eye on their children whenever they brought them over to their new home. A contractor who was working on the home one day noticed that a heavy sign he had stuck in front yard had been uprooted at some point during the night. One instance, while meeting with some of the new neighbors, Derek's heart stopped while he talked with one lady who told him that, quote, It'll be nice to have some young blood in the neighborhood, end quote.
Coincidence?
Who knows, man?
Yeah, I'm not sure if that's like a New Jersey expression, but where I come from, that's a creepy fucking thing to say no matter the context.
By around June 18th, almost 2 weeks after the first letter arrived, the second letter arrived amongst a stack of more Domino's pizza and assorted junk mail, standing out like a Thor fan with the big, blocky, handwritten lettering on a green card-sized envelope. Greeting card-sized envelope. Sorry, guys. The exact wording of the entire letter doesn't appear to be publicly available. Some of it is, but some of it is paraphrased. So, we'll just read a quick blurb from one of our main sources for tonight's episode. The article on thecut.com, written by Reeves Wiedemann.
Quote, 2 weeks after the letter arrived, Maria stopped by the house to look at some paint samples and check the mail. She recognized the thick black lettering on a card-shaped envelope and called the police. Quote, welcome again to your new home at 657 Boulevard, the Watcher wrote. The workers have been busy, and I have been watching you unload carfuls of your personal belongings. The dumpster is a nice touch. Have they found what is in the walls yet? In time they will, end quote. This time, the Watcher had addressed Derek and Maria directly, misspelling their names as Mr. and Mrs. Broaddus. Had the Watcher been close enough to hear one of the Broadduses contractors addressing them? The Watcher boasted of having learned a lot about the family in the preceding weeks, especially about their children. The letter identified the Broadduses' 3 kids by birth order and by their nicknames, the ones Maria had been yelling. Quote, I am pleased to know your names now, and the name of the young blood you have brought to me, it said. You certainly say their names often, end quote. The letter asked about one child in particular, whom the writer had seen using an easel inside an enclosed porch. Quote, is she the artist in the family? End quote. The letter continued, quote, 657 Boulevard is anxious for you to move in. It has been years and years since the young blood ruled the hallways of the house. Have you found all the secrets it holds yet? Will the young blood play in the basement, or are they too afraid to go down there alone? I would be very afraid if I were them. It is far away from the rest of the house. If you were upstairs, you would never hear them scream. Will they sleep in the attic, or will you all sleep on the second floor? Who has the bedrooms facing the street? I'll know as soon as you move in. It will help me to know who is in which bedroom. Then, I can plan better. All of the windows and doors in 657 Boulevard allow me to watch you and track you as you move through the house. Who am I? I am the Watcher and have been in control of 657 Boulevard for the better part of 2 decades now. The Woods family turned it over to you. It was their time to move on and kindly sold it when I asked them to. I pass by many times a day. 657 Boulevard is my job, my life, my obsession. And now you are too, Broaddus family. Welcome to the product of your greed. Greed is what brought the past 3 families to 657 Boulevard, and now it has brought you to me. Have a happy moving in day. You know I will be watching. End quote. Derek and Maria stopped bringing their kids to the house. They were no longer sure when or if they would move in. End of excerpt.
By late June, the family had had enough of the police department's lack of progress in solving the case and decided to hire their own private investigator, who staked out the neighborhood. But this person did not end up finding anything worthy of note. Derek became obsessed, resorting to hiding in dark corners of the neighborhood to stake out his own home from a distance, in the off chance that a shadowy figure would approach the home suspiciously. The Broadduses soon hired ex-FBI agent Robert Lenhan, who ran a threat assessment on the suspect. He concluded that based on writer's double spacing and the fact that envelope was addressed to, quote, M/M Broaddus.
Just a note here, they spelled the family name wrong. They spelled it Braddus instead of Broaddus.
Whoever the so-called Watcher was likely a voracious reader and less macho. June soon turned to July, and it had been several weeks since the Broadduses had heard from the Watcher. Their family had been mainly staying with Maria's parents since by this time they had already sold their old house and were too scared to move into 657 Boulevard. 4th of July weekend had come and gone uneventfully, and the family had begun to wonder if they had heard the last of the Watcher. They hadn't.
Holy shit, man. July 18th, 2014. A third letter arrived. Quote, "Where have you gone to? 657 Boulevard is missing you. The house is crying from all the pain it's going through. You have changed it and made it so fancy. You are stealing its history. It cries for the past and what used to be in the time when I roamed its halls. The 1960s were a good time for 657 Boulevard when I ran from room to room imagining the life with the rich occupants there. The house was full of life and young blood. Then it got old and so did my father, but he kept watching until the day he died. And now I watch and wait for the day when the young blood will be mine again." End quote.
Over 6 months would pass with no further leads or developments in the case until February of 2015, when the Broadduses decided to put the home back on the market. They listed it for $1.495 million to reflect the renovation work they have done to it, but ultimately nobody bought it. In March, they lowered the asking price by $100,000, but still nobody would buy the house. By May of that year, they again lowered the asking price to just $1.25 million, at this point being less than they originally paid for it. In June of 2015, the Broadduses decided to sue the previous owners, the Woods, for the amount they paid for the home plus other damages, alleging that they knew about the letter writer and failed to inform them of it prior to their purchase. But this was later rejected by a judge. However, in January of 2016, the Woods filed a counterclaim against the Broadduses for defamation and claiming that they were not under any legal obligation to disclose the letter they had received from so-called Watcher prior to selling the home. The claims on both sides would later be rejected by the judge. At their wits' end, the Broadduses considered selling the lot to a developer who would tear down the home and split it into 2 separate lots. When their intent was made public, they were wildly criticized by many local residents who were suspicious of their motives. Some questioning whether it may have been the Broadduses sending the letters to themselves all alone. Many were upset, as this would mark the end of their beautiful upscale neighborhood by replacing this beautiful home with 2 tacky replacements with front-facing garages. However, due to zoning regulations, the property was too narrow for it to be split into 2, which would have put the total widths at slightly under 70-foot minimum and was ultimately rejected by the city planning board.
Yeah, what an absolute fucking nightmare. So do you understand what happened there? What was going on? So basically they were trying to get rid of the house. They at first they asked for kind of a little bit higher price than they paid for it, but then they lowered it, kept lowering it until it was actually slightly under what they paid for it. Nobody would buy the house, and then what they considered doing was just selling it off to a developer so that the developer could then tear it down and build 2 new smaller homes right next to each other for like a greater profit margin. But what that did was it pissed off all the neighbors, because it would have made their neighborhood less beautiful. It would have ruined the flow of the neighborhood, so to speak. If you live in the US, you're probably familiar with all the new construction going on. People condensing lots together so that what used to be 1 bigger house is now 2 smaller houses. They look like absolute shit, and I would be pissed too if I lived in this neighborhood and someone tried to do this. But ultimately, the planning board rejected it, because if they were to split it up in 2, each lot width would have been under the 70-foot minimum. So that's what saved the neighborhood, I guess. But anyway, it's an absolute fucking nightmare for the Broadduses, though. Did you have something you want to say?
Yeah, I wonder If you remember the King of the Hill episode where Hank was actually on the planning board of his neighborhood, probably.
I don't think I remember that one, but go on. What happens?
I think it was when Dale wanted to build a big tower and the electrified fence or something around his house or something like that. And he wanted Hank to actually support him because he was on board. But he kind of...
Hank was on the board?
Yeah. But Hank kind of didn't like the idea. He didn't support it, right? Yeah. And then I think he said something like, Hank, you're dead to me, or something like that, after that. Kind of funny.
I could always count on you to fucking bring up a King of the Hill reference, man. Anyway, are we ready to move on?
Sure.
By February 1st, 2017, they had begun renting the house out to a large family with dogs who didn't care about the Watcher. Later that same month, a fourth letter from the Watcher arrived at 657 Boulevard after 2.5 years of silence. This time, more taunting and cartoonishly evil than ever. Quote, 657 Boulevard survived your attempted assault and stood strong with its army of supporters barricading its gates. My soldiers of the Boulevard followed my orders to a T. They carried out their mission and saved the soul of 657 Boulevard with my orders. All hail the Watcher! Maybe a car accident. Maybe a fire. Maybe something as simple as a mild illness that never seems to go away, but makes you fell sick day after day after day after day after day. Maybe the mysterious death of a pet. Loved ones suddenly die. Planes and cars and bicycles crash. Bones break. You are despised by the house. And the Watcher won. End quote.
2017 hadn't even come to a close before the Broadduses decided it was time to list the house for sale yet again, this time at even steeper discount, $1.125 million in October. In December, Derek made the bonehead decision to write and hand-deliver several anonymous letters to families who had been critical of him online. The following excerpt comes from an article written by Reeves Wiedemann in thecut.com. Quote, the Watcher was also no longer the only person sending anonymous letters in Westfield. Last Christmas Eve, several families received an envelope in their mailboxes. They'd been delivered by hand to the homes of people who had been the most vocal criticizing the Broadduses online. One of them, who lived in few blocks down the boulevard, had written on Facebook, quote, I wish we could go back to the days of tar and feathers. I have just the couple in mind. End quote. Another family who got the letter told me it was weirdly poetic, as the Watchers had been, and that it accused the families of speculating inaccurately about the Broadduses. It included several stories about recent acts of domestic terrorism in which signs of brewing mental illness had gone unnoticed. The typed letters were signed, Friends of the Broaddus family. The letter writer had clearly been infected not only with the Watcher's penchant for anonymous notes, but also a simmering resentment, one that had snaked its way through Westfield, making enemies of neighbors. The people who received the letters didn't know who sent them, but the tone had a familiar ring to me. When I asked Derek Broaddus whether he had written them, he paused for a moment, then admitted he had. He wasn't proud of it. He hadn't even told his wife, and said they were the only anonymous letters he'd written. But he had felt driven to his wits' end, fed up with watching silently as people threw accusation at his family, based on particularly nothing. One of the people who received the letter told me they had never met the Broadduses, and had no interest in doing so. The Watcher had been obsessed with 657 Boulevard. And Derek, in turn, had become obsessed with the Watcher and everything the letter had set in motion. It's like cancer, he told me. We think about it every day. End of excerpt.
Okay, yeah, that's pretty cringe, man. So, you either find out who the Watcher is or you live long enough to become him, I guess. But what do you think about that? To me, that almost shines a spotlight on him as possibly being the Watcher. He's going around sending these anonymous letters to people who are criticizing him online. What do you think about that? It seems to me if he really cared about the criticism, the best course of action would be to just kind of ignore it for a while. I know that's really hard to do, but
we managed it with the Bigfoot episode, right? Somehow.
Yeah, we did. Yeah,
so it's not the same.
It's definitely not on the same level, but I think it's more like adding gas to the fire when you start sending messages to people and fighting back against them online.
Definitely. But he it seems like he really leaned into it, you know.
Yeah.
But what they usually say, if there is like some sort of conflict going on, you know, people, they sometimes start to mirror each other, right, in their behavior. But it's interesting that he actually, he couldn't send letters to the Watcher. So
he shouldn't have done it. That's for sure, because it became obvious that he was the one sending the letters to people. It's like, you're pretending to be your anonymous friends, people that love you. Like, I don't know. It's just a bad move. Anyway, let's continue on. We're almost done, guys. In December of 2018, a new investigation was opened and the authorities found that the envelopes had been licked shut. Using DNA analysis, they discovered that whoever licked the envelopes shut was a female. However, no one in the Broaddus family was a match, nor were any of the females in the Langford family next door, from what I could tell. Police then went around the neighborhood asking for local residents to voluntarily submit their DNA. Most were reportedly helpful and happy to oblige. Some people were not home during the police canvass, and 2 refused. Suffice to say, in the end, it doesn't really matter. No match to the DNA was ever found. In the summer of 2019, 5 years after the initial ordeal, the Broaddus family finally sold the home to the Carr family for $959,000, nearly $400,000 less than what they paid for it. Since then, the family has requested that the police close the case and release the DNA evidence to them so that they can conduct their own further testing on the sample in hopes that genetic genealogy can be used to identify the source of the saliva found under the envelope, but the authorities have declined to do so. All right, that brings us kind of to the end of our story here. So let's list off some of the hard facts in the case. So this is what we do know. The letters were processed in Kearney, which is in northern New Jersey, and the first one was postmarked on June 4th, just one day prior to the Broadduses receiving it in their mailbox. Shut up. No fingerprints were found, although female saliva was used to lick the envelopes. All right, Ivan, let's go over some common theories. Why don't you take it away here?
Yeah, the first theory is that the Broadduses have suspected that the Watcher may have been someone who was angry that they lost in a bidding war to get the home. 657 Boulevard was considered to be the nicest home on the boulevard, and the Woods received multiple offers on the home above their asking price. In the end, Broadduses won that bidding war, possibly angering someone or something that wanted the house really badly, but in the end, could not outbid the Broadduses.
All right, next one. Some theories point to the Broadduses themselves as the origin of the creepy letters. One possibility here is buyer's remorse. Perhaps they realized that they had buyer's remorse and staged the whole thing to try to get out of the deal. Other motives floated include an insurance scam, a movie deal inspired by the situation, or even an elaborate plan to defraud the Woods family. After all, the Watcher only appeared once the Broadduses bought the house. Additionally, the letters indicated details about certain home renovations that were not visible from the exterior of the home. However, if any of these theories were true, the Broadduses' plan backfired spectacularly. They ended up selling the house at a significant loss, seemingly gaining nothing from their scheme. Moving on to the third theory here, Michael Langford, the strange man in his 60s who lived next door with his 90-something-year-old mother. He may have had some kind of mental illness that caused him to develop an obsession with the home. Some of the timeline of events in his life do match up with what was in the Watcher letters. He was also among the only people in the entire neighborhood who had lived there in the 1960s. Everyone else had moved in after. All right, man, so why don't you tell us about the next one?
A butthurt former resident or person who spent time in the home, perhaps someone who has a lot of dear memories of their childhood in the home. and through a sick sense of nostalgia wrote the letters in order to discourage the new owners from changing anything.
Yeah, this one I can kind of understand. A few years back, I was just snooping around on Google Maps and I saw that my own childhood home had been bulldozed and in its place stood like an apartment building.
How did it make you feel?
I mean, I was pretty butthurt about it, I'm not going to lie. I shouldn't be, logically, because I don't live there anymore, but I wasn't butthurt enough, though, to start writing letters and shit or to act out in any weird way. It's just like, it was kind of just a slight bummer. That's all.
Yeah, man. Today I think it's in some respect it's a special episode because I have something else to say about it.
Oh, okay. Well, go on.
Do you remember that King of the Hill episode?
Which one?
Where the old lady came to the Hank's house. She knocked on his door and he said, and she was like, she said she used to live there or something, and she wanted to die there.
Oh, I vaguely remember that. Yeah,
she wanted to, like, in the end she said, I want to die here, but it was Christmas time, so they were not like.
I vaguely remember that. Yeah,
really happy about.
I don't remember all the details of that episode, but I do remember that. I just remember, wasn't there a scene where she was standing outside in the rain or something?
Something like that. But yeah,
and they're like all freaked out about it. She's just standing outside in the rain or something.
She wouldn't give up. She wouldn't give up. She really wanted to stay there. You know, she
Die
had this like strong childhood memories or something.
Yeah. I mean, it's not logical, but I do kind of see how someone who's not all there in the head might be triggered by someone making alterations to a home or a place where they hold many dear memories. You know, it's kind of like changing history in a way rather than preserving it.
And if it's, you know, if the house, if the person is old, and allegedly he or she is, right, a little bit old.
We'll get into that, but yeah, so some of the authorities a lot of the investigators seem to think that this might be an older person just based on certain mannerisms in the way that they wrote certain things and the language used and all that, but
we'll talk about it.
Yeah, we can talk about that later.
Yeah.
Why don't you continue on with the next one here?
A thrill seeker. Perhaps someone who fixated on the new family simply because they were a convenient target.
And our last theory, but definitely not the real last theory, just the last one we've got written down. Possibly some neighbors who didn't like the Broadduses for some reason, perhaps because they had a bunch of screaming children or something. Or, of course, you can just fill in your own personal theory if none of these make any sense to you.
And don't forget to leave your theory in the comment section.
Oh, yeah, YouTube, that's right. If you're on YouTube, leave your own theory here. All right, man, are you ready to try and solve this sumbitch once and for all?
Let's try.
All right, so first and foremost, we have to provide a disclaimer here that anyone and everyone we're going to be discussing are innocent until proven guilty in a court of law. And much like Dr. Grande on YouTube, we're not diagnosing anyone in this episode, only speculating on what could be happening in a situation like this. So with that out of the way, whodunit, man? What are your thoughts? Do you have any thoughts that you want to throw out there?
Actually, when we were discussing the common theories, and when we talked about that specific and crucial episode of King of the Hill, I actually got really kind of inspired by that theory that it could have actually been some former resident who was obsessed kind of with the house and
don't hold me to this, but I think everyone past like the Woods family, everyone who had like lived there prior to the Woods family might be dead, or at least most of them. I think they might have all been looked into. Okay, so now that I'm double checking our source here, it does say that it says this: no one who had lived in the house before the Woodses could recall anything unusual. It was hard for people to imagine that their idyllic neighborhood could be host to something so sinister. A woman who lives nearby told me that after the news broke, she and 10 or so of her neighbors had gathered in the street to puzzle out who might have sent the letters. Eventually, she said they came to a consensus. Maybe the Broadduses had sent the letters to themselves. Okay, So
Did you say,
I don't know. I don't know the details behind who the previous residents of the home were exactly. Before because the Woods family had lived in there for 23 years. So going back, doing the math, so 2014 minus 23, 91, about 1991 is when the Woods moved in there. So you're going back to the 80s, maybe perhaps even longer back. So this would have been a resident that lived in the house before the Woods. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah.
I mean, it's possible, man, but we just don't know enough about who any of those people could be. But is that kind of what you're going with?
Yeah, for sure. It's we don't have the data, right? But it seems like plausible hypothesis, possible hypothesis. You know, it could have happened. What do you think? What comes to your mind?
So I've had all right. So it took me about a week to write this episode. And I was thinking about it, and I have come to a kind of a consensus in my head as to what I think is the most likely scenario. But I got about 3, but for the sake of like gun to my head, I have to choose the right answer, you know, or it's going off. I do have one that I'll get to, but I'm going to talk about the other 1 or 2 that I thought of before that. So I initially thought that maybe this writer was somebody who lost the bidding war to get the house. When they closed on the house, somebody really, really wanted this house, and the Broadduses outbid them. They couldn't outbid the Broadduses, and they were really pissed about it, right? So it kind of makes sense. Like the contractor's sign was ripped out of the yard. They're trying to scare the Broadduses out of living in this house, kind of Scooby-Doo villain style. So the first letter was postmarked on June 4th, which was before the sale was even public. So this kind of indicates to me that someone would have had to have some insider knowledge that only the buyer, the seller, or any of the losers of the sale would know about, right? I can't help but feel that kind of the way that the letter writer writes, it's kind of ridiculous. Nobody talks like that in real life. It's not somebody threatening to put a bomb in their house or a cobra in their mailbox or something like that. It's some creepy motherfucker who's trying to emulate a Scooby-Doo villain, right? Which, again, it kind of suggests to me that this person is just trying to scare them away like a Scooby-Doo villain would. And they would have gotten away with it if it weren't for this meddling podcast, you know. I think in the end, though, their tactic failed because the Broadduses, they just ended up putting the house up for rent instead. And so I do think the goal of this person would have been to scare the Broadduses away entirely so that they'd put the house back on the market, and then they'd have their second chance to swoop in and get the house that they wanted originally. And maybe even with like a steeper discount because there's this psycho letter writer running around, you know? You know, the DNA on the envelope indicates that the whoever licked the envelope was a female. And then the writing analysis also suggests that it was like an older person due to certain mannerisms, for lack of a better word. And so I don't think this person is like an axe murderer type person. I just think it's somebody who really wants the Broadduses to believe that they're an axe murderer kind of type person. But all right, so honestly though, if this were a gun to my head situation, and if I don't pick the right answer, the gun's going off, right? I gotta say that I think that this was an inside job. I think the Broadduses did this.
Whoa.
You're looking at me weird, like I just
but you were like putting like the argument for the bidding war, right? And then you're like, but you know, man, actually,
I subverted your expectations.
Yeah. How would you like support this argument?
All right, so for one, the letter writer was just so over the top, and it just reminded me a lot of. Do you remember when we did the Axeman episode? And you know, his letter, it reminded me of the letter that the Axeman wrote. It's just so over the top, almost cartoonish, super villainy type language. Nobody talks like that. It works in scary movies, but in real life, it's just comical. And, the letter writer indicated details about renovations inside the home that you would only be able to see if you were inside the home. So anyone looking in through the house windows or anything like that would not be able to see these specific renovations that were mentioned in the letters. So whoever was writing these notes had to have had intimate knowledge of the interior of the home, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that's one reason why I lean more towards the Broadduses maybe doing this. They knew the names and the nicknames of the kids, whoever this letter writer was. Initially, they played it off like they didn't. But as the other letters came in, the names of the children were also shown in the letters. And I think if somebody was just watching them from far away, I don't think they would have been able to know that. How? How would you be able to know what's on the inside of the home? Stuff that you can't even see from outside, from like the outside the window into the house. You can't even see these specific renovations. And then also know the names of your children. Yeah, I don't think this would have been some guy in like some creeper van staring out of the windshield with binoculars at the house. Like it's just not realistic. He would have been caught by now.
Yeah, I just say it depends how much time you spend watching, man. If someone, it doesn't have to be the guy with the binoculars in the weird ice cream van or something, right?
Yeah,
it could have been someone else. Because I think if it was someone who knew what was inside the house before, and if that someone had been watching the process of renovation, even from outside, he would have seen what kind of stuff the builders would bring inside, right?
Yeah, I guess that's an argument, but we don't know exactly what these specific renovations are, because I think this is like a secret that the police are keeping close to their chest. I don't think they're putting it all out there in the public for a reason. I think if they ever catch a suspect, they'll be able to get certain information out of the suspect to confirm that, yes, this is the guy we're looking for, right? So they're not throwing all of the information out there into the public, but from what we do know, certain renovations that were mentioned in some of these letters would not be able to be seen from the outside of the house in. You would have to be inside of the house to know what these renovations were. So whoever this letter writer was would have had to have been inside the house. Either someone that the Broadduses let into their home, or they broke into the house somehow and went in there when they weren't home. But what's more realistic to you? That it would be either the Broadduses or someone they knew that they let in the house willingly, or somebody who just broke into the house secretly and silently exited one day. That doesn't make any sense to me. It just, something about this just, it's like cartoonishly evil, and I don't think real evil people exist in this fashion. Maybe they do, but it's very rare, right? So let me get into my other reasons for this. So the timing of the letters, it's kind of sus to me. So the first letter arrived to the Woods just several days before they moved out. And, the Woods, they just said, like, what the fuck is this? They didn't even take it seriously enough to even keep it. So they just threw it away. And then when the Broadduses start moving in their stuff, that's kind of when shit hits the fan. And they're like, what the hell is this? Pearl clutching and that sort of thing. Yeah, but at the same time, if they were innocent, I would also be freaked out, because if I got 3 kids and the letter writer is like mentioning all this creepy shit about my kids, I would be freaked out too. It doesn't sound like the Woods had any children. I think they were an older couple. But yeah, just the timing of it is a little sus to me. Also, the way that Derek wrote those fake anonymous letters. Do you remember when we went over that? The fake anonymous letters to the local residents that were being critical of him. I think this kind of indicates to me that he was desperate for people to just sympathize with him. And he was doing damage control, which ended up backfiring, and it made him look even more unhinged. And he signed them off as friends of the Broaddus family, which to me, it's so weird. It's like he imagines that there could be this anonymous group of people out there in the ether that just love the Broaddus family so much that they took it upon themselves to write angry letters to people in the community that were criticizing them. It just screams narcissism to me. And even though we don't really know the exact contents of the letters, it said that the language that was used was very similar to the Watcher letters. So I'm starting to see a pattern here.
Mhm.
So the way that the letters were written also, from what I noticed, kind of weirdly flattering to the Broadduses as well, like unnecessarily so. So one example is, I think in one of the letters they said that if you lived on Boulevard, you made it, or something like that. And I think like something about how there are some rich people moving in to gentrify the place. I'm paraphrasing here, and also that they're making the house fancy and all that. In a way, if you think about it, it's sort of this roundabout way of complimenting them and stroking Derek's ego while simultaneously trying to scare the shit out of him. But I don't think someone who wants to scare the shit out of somebody would simultaneously try to stroke their ego as well. It's so weird. Yeah, it's something about it just doesn't sit right with me. So if I'm correct, I think that the goal here, if the Broaddus family were behind this, right, I think it would have been some scheme to get out of the deal or to sue the Woods family. I think it was actually to get out of the deal. I think what happened was that Derek either overstretched himself financially by getting the house, or he realized after he had already closed on the house that he paid entirely way too much for it. But anyway, for whatever reason, he had buyer's remorse, and I think he was looking for a way out. But there was no way out because he already closed on it. So I think that the evidence for that is the fact that he sold the house for a steep loss years later, despite doing renovations on it. So I think he paid too much for it. He had buyer's remorse. So he started mailing these letters, the first one to the Woods, which would establish some sort of credibility. And then the rest to himself to either garner some sympathy, perhaps as like a pretense for some sort of lawsuit down the line that would help him get his money back. I think that he would have had somebody else lick the envelope, tricked someone else into licking the envelope. Or maybe he even planted someone else's saliva without their knowledge. I mean, it's possible. That would be some psycho shit, real psycho shit, but possible to me. And then bam, I think that's how the legend was born. As for Maria and the kids, I lean towards saying that I think this was all Derek. I don't even think that Maria and the kids knew what he was doing. I know this is some wild speculation.
Yeah, kind of
wild speculation, and innocent until proven guilty. I want to make that very clear. But my own personal theory, I think this was all on Derek. I don't think he told Maria what his plan was. And I think it was maybe what happened was Maria kind of pressured him into buying this house because she really wanted to live in her old neighborhood, but the asking price was a little high. And he just he caved, he bought the house, and then later said, oh shit, why did I do that? And he wanted a way out of the deal somehow that his wife would be on board with. And if some psycho is out there in the ether threatening their children, that would definitely make any mother agree to go back on the deal, So what do you think, man?
I think I like your hypothesis. It's really interesting, but it's really dark in a way. If you consider,
I think okay. So my theory is that Derek kind of went full Juicy Smollett or whatever the hell that guy's name is. You remember that guy who faked a hate crime on himself like 5 years ago?
No.
You don't remember Juicy Smollett? Anyway, it's fine. Our listeners for sure do. But I think, some people, they do this. They fake victimization for public sympathy. And I think in this case, it was less about sympathy and more about just trying to get out of the deal that he had gotten himself into. And I think the deal just, I mean, this whole stunt backfired spectacularly, and he ended up selling the home for a loss. And I think, and I know we know he paid too much for the house, because 5 years later, when real estate prices as a whole have increased by a lot, he still couldn't even sell the house for what he paid for it. He ended up selling it for a loss. So, I just think that's what happened here.
Do we know anything about their financial situation or not? Much?
We don't know any specifics, but what I did see is that he was living in a home that cost $300,000. And then he jumped to another home that was $700,000, and then he jumped to this one that he paid. I think he paid 1.395 million, 1.3 million, something like that. And there was some speculation that he had overstretched himself financially, and he might have figured that he couldn't afford it financially, and was looking for a way out. That's I to me, gun to my head, I think that's what happened. Could I be wrong? Absolutely. I still say he's innocent until proven guilty, and I do not condone harassing the guy or anything like that, because at the end of the day, I don't know what the situation is. But if I were to speculate, I think that's what happened. What about you? Do you still believe it might have been a past resident who wanted to die in the house or something, like the episode of King of the Hill?
I mean, my argument didn't have like as much of the
less substance, right?
Less substance and less support. It sounded like kind of reasonable to me, considering the letters and the content of the letters, because
they did say that
the writer allegedly was in a house before. He was talking about like the young blood or whatnot, right?
Right, but I don't think that whoever was the letter writer was who they said they were. That's the whole point here. I don't think that this letter writer was being honest about who they were. I think they were writing this letter trying to trick people into believing there's someone that they're not. And the whole point was either to scare the shit out of the Broaddus family, or conversely, if it was the Broaddus family sending it to themselves, to set up kind of like a pretense, like an excuse to get out of this deal.
Yeah, can we go on a little bit of a tangent here?
Absolutely.
Just a little bit, because I'm kind of curious. How does if you want to pull out of the deal when you already got the house, do you know like rough process? Or
I don't know. You'd have to speak to a lawyer, and I'm definitely not a lawyer. But I think it was like a Hail Mary attempt at trying to get out of this deal that he had already closed on. Maybe hoping that the previous owners, the Woods, would just sympathize with him and be like, you know what? Okay, we'll cancel the deal. We'll give you your money back, and we'll take the house back and try to sell it to somebody else.
Because like if we knew, like, we don't know, but if we knew like the process of withdrawing from the deal, if it was a high penalty for we could like weight it in on the kind of a scales, you know. If your argument that he might have not told the wife and the kids, they were not on the same page about the story, he made it up, didn't tell them, like the risks for their, you know, emotional well-being would be quite high, right? But and I think if you had like this,
right, so let's assume that I am right. I think after Derek started sending these letters to himself, again, allegedly, I mean, it's like crossing the Rubicon. After that, there's no going back. There's no going back from that. You have to keep up the charade, because there's no coming clean about that in the end. Because you come clean about something like that, your wife is probably going to divorce you, take your kids, sue you, take half your belongings, yada yada. That's like a life that's guaranteed life ruining event if a secret like that got out.
Definitely.
So he has to keep up that charade. If he did do this to himself, right? He would have to keep up this charade. Not to mention, if it came out publicly, his life would be ruined. He would be forever tainted as the guy who mailed creepy ass letters to himself and tried to defraud people out of their money.
Yeah, that's why I'd say it's hard to judge, because I don't know. Again, I don't know what's the penalty for withdrawing from the deal, but still.
Well, it's not about a penalty. It's just, I think what it was trying to get sympathy from the people who sold the house, so that they would just say, okay, we'll go back on it. You know, we feel sorry for you where you're receiving these letters. So why don't we just give you your money back and we'll take the house back and you can go about your business. I think that was the original deal, because I think that they paid too much for this house. And I think that's evident because despite all the renovations they did on the house and 5 years of real estate market appreciation, they still were not able to get anyone to buy the house for as much as they paid for it. They still sold it for a loss 5 years later.
Yeah, but also it's the it's the case. I heard that's usually the case. Sometimes it's the case with the best houses in the neighborhood. If you buy the best house, sometimes it's really hard to sell because people, as I understand, they buy into the neighborhoods as well.
Yeah,
and the
neighborhood is in itself arguably the most important part of buying a house for most people. Yeah. So what I heard, sometimes it's really not so easy to sell the most expensive. I believe
house.
It. Yeah, I believe that.
Something like that. But I think it's just I like I said, I like your argument, but I think the price of living in a lie, like you said, if you started that kind of game, you gotta continue till it's,
till it comes to some kind of conclusion.
Yeah. Till it comes to some kind of conclusion. That one plus the emotional kind of damage to the family, potential, right?
Yeah.
This price is just
too
high in my head again.
No, I agree with you, but that's because hindsight is 2020. My cat's on Ivan again. But anyway, that's because we have the power of hindsight. We can see that none of this was worth it. But at the time, again, under the assumption that he did this to himself, he would not have been able to have the foresight that all of these consequences would happen. He would go through this years-long ordeal and end up selling the house for a huge discount, way less than he paid for it in the beginning. If he had known that in the first place, of course he wouldn't have done what he did. Put his family through all this emotional torment and all that, but it's kind of like digging for gold. You keep digging for gold until you hit gold. You just keep going and going and going. It's kind of like the sunk cost fallacy in a way. That's kind of what I'm getting at here.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it backfired. It backfired spectacularly, and because it backfired, it causes a lot of people maybe to believe his story more, because it's like, well, if this really was him, he lost his ass because of it, so there's no way that could be him. But if he made a mistake, he miscalculated, that, it could be easily explained by that.
So why would he send the letters to the neighbors then?
Which, are you talking about those anonymous ones that were like friends of the Broaddus family?
Yes.
Because they were criticizing him online, and they were spreading information. I think they were spreading information about, like, they think it was him all along sending these letters to himself. And I think maybe he got pissed. He wanted to do damage control.
But like you said, it would put him into the spotlight, right?
Yeah.
That put him in the spotlight.
Well, I think he had no problem being in the spotlight if it was positive, as in getting sympathy from people. Yeah, but he doesn't want negative spotlight. He doesn't want people criticizing him and calling him out, telling other people that they think that he's the one behind it. So that's the point I'm making. What do you think?
It is possible, but I wouldn't give it like really high probability. But again, the points you raised I will like sound really reasonable, but
and like I said, I am not 100% sure on this. This is just my highest confidence one, but I would say I'm only overall maybe 60% sure that this is yeah, I would give it like 60%, which leaves a 40% huge portion of doubt that this could be wrong. Maybe it was some psycho out there who had it in for the Broaddus family for whatever reason. But do I think that the Watcher was who they said they were? Someone who was obsessed with this house that's been watching it since the 1960s or whatever they said? No, I don't. I don't believe that for a fucking second.
But in one of the letters, he or she said that she was in the house, right, in the 60s, inside.
Right, but the whole point I'm saying is that I don't believe that this person was that.
I just wanted to clarify.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I need some water.
Okay.
Need to get some water. Keep talking. No, keep talking, man.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, for this one, I kind of just went maybe with the most obvious one, you know, man. With it's being some old relative, just like according to the letter. I don't know. I just kind of used the
King of the Hill. Let King of the Hill be your guide.
And the method of free associations, you know. They guided me this time. So
all right,
so basically in the end we have two hypotheses, right?
Yeah, I guess we have to agree to disagree, which is fine.
Sounds good.
Yep. So let us know in the comments, are you Team Nate or Team Ivan or just some other theory? All right, man. Do you have any apologies, clarifications, or shout outs to get out of the way before we end the episode?
Of course, man. As it was our episode about, like, you know, real life events kind of thing. So there are some important things to say.
Okay.
I'd like to, because I kind of lean into the hypothesis about the former residents being the authors of the letter.
Yeah. I'd
like to apologize to the former residents.
Of 657 Boulevard?
657 Boulevard. Yeah.
Why? To who specifically? Can you name them?
Like all of them.
All of them.
All of them.
Okay.
Who is listening to this podcast or they're not listening to this podcast? Yeah, I was just keeping the open mind.
Yeah, I mean, yeah.
And following the free associations, King of the Hill, and yeah, guys, if you're innocent, sorry, and yeah, I love you all. All of you.
Right on. Yeah, so I just want to make a clarification here that I'm not accusing the Broaddus family of any wrongdoing here, only speculating on what could be happening in a situation like this. And everyone is innocent until proven guilty in a court of law. So please don't send us any anonymous letters, friends of the Broaddus family. As far as I'm concerned, you're still innocent. All right, man, I think it's time to get out of here. Like sands through the hourglass, so too are the minutes of our podcast. But don't fret, dear listener. We'll be back again to breathe new life into an old mystery next time.
Помните, ребята, истина прячется в тени. Вместе мы найдем ее.
This is Super Mystery Bros.
trotted over to the mailbox to grab the mail. Wiping the sweat off his brow using his forearm, he flicked open the mailbox and grabbed a fat...
What the what?
Sorry. Just in the weird mood today.
What the fuck are you talking about?
That energy drink was weird. There was something in it, man. I'm telling you, there was something in that energy drink. Oh.